Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. Today is actually the official start of hurricane season down there in the Pacific. We've actually got some convection that's blowing up that went across Central America. National Weather Service does actually have this a 20% probability of it forming, but it's going to continue westbound and not be an impact of it en masse. Out further into the Caribbean, yes, the National Weather Service does in fact start issuing advisories today, but there's not really much happening this time of year. So I'll keep you updated, as we get deeper into hurricane season, because we are expecting a very active season. Where the instability is going to be today is right along this frontal boundary draped across at central Florida. That's where we could be seeing some showers and stronger thunderstorms turning severe later on this afternoon. We also have another complex of storms that's going to impact the Carolinas. Then we'll be watching that more active subtropical jet stream that's just feeding this energy up here towards West Texas into Oklahoma into Kansas. Those are going to get activated along a dry line as we head into around the 4 o'clock time frame. I'm looking at some stronger thunderstorms that start to bubble up within that region. So if you take a look at the overall 500 millibar height anomalies, you can actually see it a little bit better down here into central Florida. You got the ridge further south, you got the colder air pressing with the stalled frontal boundary. That's kind of like your battle zone where we should start to see showers and thunderstorms, and some of those will be turning severe. And then further north into the Carolinas, we're also looking at new convection. And then we'll be watching all out eyes out west, where we have a pretty significant trough that's going to be building out there in Mexico. And out ahead of it, at least for today, the dry line will be getting active there in West Texas, Western Oklahoma, back into Kansas. And then as we get into tomorrow, this feature will be a little bit closer and set the stage for more of a widespread event across those areas into Texas. And that will eventually move off into Louisiana. But for today, our main concern is going to be three areas right along that battle zone, first and foremost, into central Florida. We could be looking at some stronger to severe thunderstorms. Some of those could produce some larger hail, but definitely some damaging winds with that. And you can't rule out an isolated tornado within that region. And then further north, we also have another area of concern that's draped across the Carolinas, back into North and South Carolina. And then we have a more renewed concern with an upgraded enhanced risk. This is mainly upgraded for a wind threat. So you're going to have the dry line get activated in West Texas. We're going to have another secondary low pressure that's going to be highlighted across the panhandle. And these could be some big time wind producers with these mesoscale convective systems moving across. So can't be rolling out. Some of these areas could produce some 60, 70, maybe even some 80-mile-per-hour wind gust. Is not out of the question there in Texas Panhandle, there in western Oklahoma. As we get into central Oklahoma and northern Oklahoma, portions of Kansas there, I think the main time frame, it kind of gets going around 4 o'clock this afternoon. And the main time frame is going to be around that 4 to 8 o'clock, and kind of winding down as we get deeper into the night. But it's going to be a little bit of bumpy ride for the next 12 hours or so, especially for those areas across the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma. You can see the radar depiction as we head into that 4 o'clock time frame. We've got the renewed convection that's draped across at central Florida. We also have more convection that's highlighted across the Carolinas. Then there's the dry line setup that will be activated across West Texas, the Panhandle, but especially there in Oklahoma. Can actually roll out an isolated tornado. The northern side of Oklahoma can't roll out that, but yeah, it looks to be about 4 to 8 o'clock this evening. So definitely be on high alert as we get towards peak heating, because it definitely looks to appear to be pretty bumpy and pretty windy. This is the overall setup as far as the HRRR guidance on the wind aspect, with these mesoscale convective systems that will be originating right off the dry line in West Texas into the Panhandle. You can kind of see this rib formation. That's indicative of some very strong straight line winds. You can have some downburst winds in this situation, but definitely be on high alert as we head into areas of Oklahoma, getting in deeper into the afternoon, into early evening. So that 4 to 8 o'clock window, I think, is crucial. That you will be kind of having to keep all eyes on the sky and batten down the hatches, secure loose objects now, because we are expecting 60, 70, maybe even isolated 80-mile-per-hour wind gust within these convective complexes. But for tomorrow, I think things get a little bit more widespread, especially for those areas across Texas with that system that's diving in from northern Mexico. The further it digs, the more energy is going to be able to tap into, and the more moisture is going to be able to tap into as well. That's going to be a little bit of a slow mover. So I think the initial stage will be a hail threat out here in West Texas and likely south of the I-20 corridor. But then it's going to be more of a heavier rain threat for a good part of the Lone Star State. And I think this convective system is the one that's going to be traversing across the deep south and the southeast as we head into your Friday and your Saturday time frame. But first and foremost is going to be on Thursday. I think they originate out here in West Texas. That hatched risk again could produce some of that larger hail. That's definitely been a concern down here in Texas. And I think some of the latest guidance actually has this hinting possibly an upgrade for an enhanced risk. And I think this would likely shift a little bit further south. A lot of instability. They've got a lot of higher Cape values down here. Definitely more concerned. We know we have plenty of cooler air aloft with the cold air coming in from the northwest. And that is going to activate that supercell thunderstorms right off the dry line there, with especially if that low-level jet really starts to get active with that low pressure center getting a little bit closer and going to be activating those storms likely earlier in the day, probably around the noon time frame there in West Texas. And they will be moving across some very high rainfall to them as well, because some of these bat values are going to be in the range of 1.5 to possibly 2 inches per hour. So flash flooding is going to be a concern for those areas that likely being south of the Metroplex into central Texas, down into southeast Texas. And that's exactly why we do have that expanded slight risk for excessive rainfall, and also that moderate risk as we head into these areas that's just been inundated with a lot of floodwaters as of late, been crushed with feet of water over the past couple of weeks. And this is the last thing you need, but they're going to have renewed flood watches likely be issued, and some heavier rains not out of the question to get some another 3 to 5 inches highlighted around this corridor from southeast Texas into Louisiana. A little bit lighter, but still 1 to 2 inch totals across a good part of the DFW Metroplex into central Texas and much of Oklahoma, as well as into Arkansas. With some heavier rainfall. But I feel like this is going to be upgraded to that enhanced risk, especially for those areas into West Texas and further south. I mean, the salinity values that just kind of came in is definitely a little bit concerning. This area has been no stranger for some big time hail producers. And I think these are what's going to happen again, because they're especially looking to transfer to that east southeast direction. Whenever they turn in that direction, that seems to be the highest probability of more significant hail. And some of these areas have produced some of that 3, 4. We even had some 5-inch reports. That one report back in Johnson City last week produced a 6.2 inch hailstone, just about broke a record 6.4. So yes, definitely more significant, large, if not some very large hail could unfold on Thursday. So definitely be on high alert for big time hail producers. And I think this actually transfers into Louisiana as well as we get closer into the overnight hours on Thursday, heading into Friday. But overall, it's going to be a wet time over the next 48 hours with these systems moving in. So there's the setup over Florida, likely over central Florida with those 1 to 2 inch totals. And then you have that secondary complex highlighted across the Carolinas. Then you have that third complex that gets going today across the Panhandle in West Texas and Oklahoma. And then that secondary complex that comes in on Thursday with a more widespread event. And then the heavier rain aspect of it too, with easily 3 to 5 inches in a lot of these areas that were highlighted in red. And then lighter amounts as you swing further north up into Nebraska, as well as into Iowa, back into Illinois, into Wisconsin, getting into those areas across the Dakotas, much of Minnesota. This is just over the next 48 hours as much of the West Coast continues to remain on the dry side. But overall, as we head into Friday, I think this convective complex will continue to be on the move. Now it's going to be highlighted across a good part of Louisiana, back into Mississippi, as well as into Alabama. We do have a slight risk for severe storms, likely a wind threat again, as these higher wind gusts will be traversing across that boundary, mainly along the I-10, I-20, I-30 corridor. Those will be shifting further into the deep south, as we head through Friday and end into Saturday, and put like a similar setup where we're going to be seeing today, with more convective systems that's going to be highlighted across Florida, back into Georgia, and through the Carolinas again. But once this system moves out, notice of all the orange moving in, that's a lot of drier air. I think those areas are going to start heating up in a big way. In fact, those temperatures are really likely to soar starting on the weekend and well into next week, as we have a much more longer scale pattern change. I think it's going to be on the table, as we'll be watching a ridging starting to build from Mexico. That's going to send record high temperatures across a good part of the deep south, and that warm anomalies will continue to shift further north, as we have the much cooler air will be coming in across the Pacific Northwest. And I think these will extend into the northern areas and across the upper Midwest as well, as we get deeper into next week, as we have more of a ridging start to take place further south, and the heat will be building. So yes, we've got a lot of high temperatures. Many records will likely fold, as we head into the weekend, but especially much of next week, we've got a lot of record heat going to be on the table, and some of these areas could top in the triple digits. We've got widespread 90s for the deep south and much of the southeast, and those continue to soar into the desert southwest. Really, the only cooler anomalies are going to be right across those areas in the Pacific Northwest and draped across the northern tier. And that will put the storm track a little bit further north as well, especially as we start Monday. So if you look at the overall ensemble guidance, I think the next storm system that will be moving in will be going a little bit further north. It's actually where we are today, but this will continue to move north instead of further south. So we should have a secondary low pressure center, again, highlighted across the panhandle into western Oklahoma, as well as into Kansas. But that is likely going to be shifting into Iowa as well, as we head into Monday with their own severe weather threat, because we've got the ridge going to be starting to build, for those areas across the south. So the heat that's been building across Mexico for a good part of the last couple of weeks is finally going to be on the move, and this is going to be surging northbound. So as these low pressure centers dive in, they're going to be forced to go up and over that ridge, and that's going to put the storm track a lot further north as well, and start getting these areas across a good part of the Central Plains, a good part of the upper Midwest, to put and the main culprit for severe storms as we head into next week. And I think this continues even into Tuesday. So this is the beginning stages, likely on Monday. Storm track will be building further north as we head into much of next week, while we create that battle zone a little bit further north as well. So you got the ridging coming in from the deep south, with all that warmer air coming in off of Mexico that will be draped across a good part of the south, much of the deep south and the southeast, as well as a good part of the southwest as well. We'll be watching that trough building in from the Pacific Northwest, and that will be moving across. And then, of course, in the middle, you have that battle zone that will be likely taking place, and that's where the clash in temperatures are going to be unfolding, and that's where the most significant likely severe weather will unfold as well, as we head into early next week. And so if you look at the setup by Tuesday, kind of the same deal, right? So you have the instability from the Pacific Northwest with that cooler air anomalies coming in, traversing across the northern tier, while much of the deep south will be under that ridge of high pressure, and it just shuts off any precipitation aspects as you start to dry out for a good part of the south and heat up in a big way. That's going to put the storm track well north again. So these areas across a good part of, Nebraska, back into Iowa, through Illinois, into Wisconsin, as well as into Michigan, and even some aspects of some of this severe storm could actually eventually head off into the northeast as we head into later next week. So I'm looking at some pretty significant changes, as we head into next week with the storm track, as much of the deep south will be overall kind of drying out in a big way, as much of the storm track is going to be pushed further north with the ridge building underneath. So these areas that are going to be seeing well above average precipitation and likely severe storms, as we head starting on Monday, and then it'll amplify as we get deeper into the week through pretty much all of next week. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you do like this video. Definitely subscribe to my channel and catch my next update. Why I protect you before and after the storm.